Hey, what's up everyone? I hope you're doing super great. I'll show you a walkthrough on how I created this mosaic tiles using Affinity Designer. It was a very simple project. I just wanted to get used to the tools and let me just show you how I built this. So I'll just minimize this, and at first it began with a simple search on Google for a reference, and I also had a little sketch. So I'll just bring in this sketch, and I had a few ideas. Let me see if I can rotate this. Yeah, good. So I first sketched out the lizard. Sorry, my camera kind of like blurred this out. And I also tried some kind of like symmetric patterns here with some wavy shapes. So you can see I'm using these polygonal shapes and these lines as guides. And this is actually an eye. And I was thinking of doing a bird on a tree branch, but then I just settled in for this kind of like a design, and I just stuck with the center. So it was just from this that I kind of like went into the tool and use this. So let me just go ahead and open up the software. It's already open, magic. So the first thing to do is to just create a new document, which you can just go to file and create new and create a new document. In case you have a document open and you're trying to check out which resolution you're using, you could just go to file and go to document setup, or use the Control Shift P shortcut key, and just right here where it says the dimensions, we can actually see the dimensions of this document. So just like that. So I'll just go ahead and close this. I think this is on this is one of my built-in presets, and that's the preset I'm actually using here. So again, Control Shift P is going to give you information about your document setup, and you can also change some things you're using about your document. I'm actually on margins. So if we go to dimensions, I'm actually working with a 512 by 512 pixel document, and it's on the portrait orientation rather. So because this is a vector, you can actually scale it to any size and change your document size, again using the same tool. And you can actually go in here and kind of like start typing and punching in and changing this to increase the document's resolution. So that's it for the basic document setup and resolution. So next, what I did was to create a square, and I call this a rectangle shape, and this is actually it. I just call this the mortar, and basically what this is going to do is to allow me to start placing any guides or any shapes I want on top. Now, in case for the color, if you're not seeing the color wheel like this, you might have to click this menu here and then change it to wheel. So it could actually be on sliders, but you could just set it to wheel. I like using the wheel a lot because it allows me to just quickly select colors. So let's jump into the guides group. To create a group, if you have multiple layers, just press Ctrl G and I'll group that. For instance, if I click on the rectangle layer and I do a Ctrl G, it's going to group that. So I'm just call this background, like so. Sorry about the spelling error. And what I can do is I can create, or I can duplicate this smaller shape. I can do a Ctrl J, and I go to the one underneath, and then I'll just make this fully black, and I can close the one on top. And then next you can actually see I have this background group with a list of shapes that represent the background of my document, and I can just change them and test things out. So that's just how I did that. Ctrl G to create a group. It's going to save you. So next I have a group here, so I'll just go ahead and open this group, and let me just go ahead and see this. I think I should start with the borders group, sorry, with the guides group rather. So I think what I'll do is to open up the guides group, and I'll start with this one called circles. So I'll just let's start with the radial lines. So I have my guides group. I'm gonna click that to make sure everything is open in the group. So if I click on this, it means I'm revealing, and if I click on this, it means I'm hiding the contents of the group. So I'll open up the guides group, and I'll select the radial lines. Now the radial lines are simply a group of lines I created using the pen tool. So if I click on the pen tool and say I click here and then click here, and I go to the fill and set the fill to 0, and I go to the stroke and I set this to a let's make this super dark, or let's make it white so we can see it. Now we can see the stroke. So it's a 0.2 point line stroke, and basically that's all I did for this curve. So the next thing I did was to duplicate this. So if with the curve selected, I could just do a Ctrl J. Now we have another curve underneath. So I click on the curve at the bottom, I go over to the move tool, And what I'll do is just begin to kind of like transform this at an angle. So now I've done the second one. Now the magic happens when you begin to kind of like, recreate this and then, kind of like twist this one. So let's rotate this and do Control J, and you keep doing that, and the next thing you know, you actually have a nice grid, and I could just name that grid and group that grid. So I already have this done, so I could just undo that. So I can just go to my history tool, and where I have that duplicate, I'll just click on this transform and click on clear selection, and I can just go 2 steps back to kind of like delete this line right here. So that's for my radial lines. That's how I created my radial lines. So next comes the circles. So I have a circle group, and how to do that is to click on the ellipse tool. If you go to the center of your document, if you have snapping on, this is the magnet. So turn on snapping, and there's other snapping special options here. You can snap to grid and snap to guidelines. So the guides, that's also going to help. So if I go over here, if I hold Control and Shift, left click and drag, I can actually create a circle. So I have one, go to the center, create another one, go to the center, create another one. So I have a couple of these, and to get rid of the fills, just so I can have just the lines, I just go into the fill and kind of like canceled all the fills. So just go to fill. I think there's a shortcut key to cancel a fill. You can just use the slash, and it's going to get rid of fill, that slash on the keyboard. And we actually have this fill. So I use the fill to create these circular grids because, like I said in the reference, I wanted to just create something circular, and then you can actually see it's kind of like an array kind of thing. So I'll just use that to create that grid. So that's it basically. So I have another one for the borders, and the borders are actually going to be this edge right here. So I'm thinking about this mosaic art, kind of like being on an edge, and I'll just go ahead and just select these edges and just kind of like place the tiles along this edge so that they don't shoot out or kind of like get scattered along the way, and along these edges as well. I'll just create tiles that follow the shape. So I just have everything organized with guides, and when I'm done, I just turn them off. So the entire border group is off now, and I'll off these ones like so. So if I go to the guides and just turn off the guides, everything is going to go off. So what I'll do is just quickly turn everything back on like so, and then I'll go to the guides group and turn the guides group off, and voila, just like magic, we've done that. Now comes the fun part. So I'll just go over here and start with group 1, because if you actually look at the guides, so I'll just go over here and turn on the guides. So I actually have this as group 1, and it's quite small. So if I kind of like zoom in, you can see this, and to zoom in you can just click this zoom tool, or you could just hold Control and use the mouse scroll wheel up and down. Scrolling it down is going to zoom out, scrolling it up is going to zoom in. And then I began placing these tiles. Now I'll just go over to the group. I'll click this padlock icon to unlock the group. If I press the pen tool, or P for the pen tool, I can just zoom in and add additional information. Let's say, for instance, I just want to add a little shape right here. So what I'll do is to click, 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 and just finally click this here. And you can see I have this shape right here, so I don't have a stroke. Sorry, I'll get rid of the stroke, and just for the fill, I'll select a color. Now initially I didn't select any color, so let's just try and use this one. So now you can just see what I've done is to create, I'll just press V. It sees that I've created a nice little tile right here that's totally out of place, but it's actually there, it exists, we can see it. So I'll just undo that. So basically that's the only tool I used to do the entire thing. It's just the pen tool, creating random shapes and making sure those shapes conform to the guides I created. And for that, so what about the color? How did I create the color? Well, if you have a group, right, so each shape I created, let me just do a demo real quick. So let's say I have this shape like so, and it's I just want to use a red fill and no stroke. So I have this group, and I'll just quickly create another one to complete it. And you have to like click the last one, the first one you created, to complete that shape. So let's say I have these shapes. I'll just press shift and click this one. press Ctrl G to group that, and I'll add a layer effect adjustment, and I'll click on recolor. So with what recolor does, it allows me to change the color of the content within that group. So I can just select any color I want, desaturate that color, and then turn on the lightness for that color. So basically that's how I was able to quickly recolor. But the good thing is I started with a grayscale value. So I'll just hide this group and also hide this one. So what do I mean by I started with a grayscale value? Let me just turn off the recoloring, and this is what I started with. So by having a grayscale mid-range value, each time I apply the recolor, it's going to, kind of like take account of the grayscale values so that I can have variations of that same hue. So I don't know if that's making sense, but let me just go ahead and show you how I did that. So if I go off to the color right here, I can actually set this to a different color palette that is going to allow me to see. So let's see, I have sliders. So instead of HSL, I'll just click on grayscale, and you can actually see the values you can use for the grayscale. And we can even make this kind of like boxed so that I can use a specific color. So basically I just stayed within this specific range of the grayscale values. So you can actually see each of these shapes. If I click on them and I turn off the recolor, it just means I was actually selecting. Now each time I click on this, I want you to look at the color wheel. So each time I'm clicking on this, you can actually see the values I'm staying within. Like basically if I use the move tool and just click between these guys, you can actually see the grayscale values moving, and I don't go to the maximum extreme, I don't go to the darkest. So that's how I was able to do that. And then after I did that, I just turn on a recolor adjustment layer. Now it can be much more complex than that. You can do much more variations, but that's just how I did that. Now another way you can select the colors instead of using this color wheel here is to go to the fill tool. So if I go to the fill and click on the swatches, if you click this drop down, you can select either colors or gradients, but this time around let's just select the grays, and you can see you can easily and quickly select these gray values. So for instance, if I open this up, let me unlock, oops, not that, let me just quickly let me unlock that, and let's open, say, group 12. I'll just click the padlock icon to unlock, and I'll turn off the recolor. So now I'm in group 12, and I'll turn off these main layer effects. So now let's just quickly go ahead. So if I select this shape, for instance, I could just open up the fill tool, the swatches. I could just select any of these values. You can see that changing real quick. So it allows me to easily stay within this range to select the color and then stay within that range. Then let me just go to the navigator and just zoom in. So I start creating these circular paths and then adding these shapes. So this is the next one, and you can see the more I move out, the larger it's starting to get. So this is the next one. That's for group 4. Now for group 4, I actually wanted to break these tiles into smaller components, and don't worry, I'll show you how you can break an already existing tile. So for instance, if I go to this one now, group 4 is locked, so I can't make changes. Let me just get back and lock group 1. So group 4 is locked, and basically I have all these shapes in group 4. If I unlock the shape, I can now select it. So let's say I select this one and I want to break this shape. All I need to do is to switch over to the node tool and add a node here and add another one here, and then I'll hold shift and click the first node, and over here at the actions I can click on break curve, and then I immediately close the curve. So by doing that, I can now go and select these edge, and you can see we've broken the shape into smaller constituents. So that's how I was able to add a little additional detail apart from just breaking. I just kind of like did that. So that's how I was able to break this. So let me just go ahead and close this. And basically those are the major tools I use. Just the pen tool for the quick shape creation, the node tool to select points and move them around in case, I don't really like how this shape is and I wanted to conform to a specific shape. You can always, kind of like change it and then use the pen tool to add a new shape that will conform to this, just like that. And sometimes when you create a shape, you realize it's actually somewhere else. If I turn this off, okay, good. So it actually created this inside, but in case it's somewhere else, we can always open the group and drag the shape in there. So I'll just go ahead and lock this. And let's go to group 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm just trying to be a little bit consistent and use the same colors around. Go to 9, 10, 11. And the last one is kind of like small. So I'll just open group 12 and you can actually see. So we're actually using some cool tones here. There's no warm hue, just some cool hue tones. So basically that's all I kind of like used. So for the border or these edges right here, if I go ahead and turn on the borders, I basically used the same pen tool. I dropped in a few squares and then using the node tool began to rearrange them, to twist them just like that. So if I go, for instance, if I double click on this node, if I use the transform tool, I can just slightly rotate this, kind of like that. And then I could just go things like, kind of like change this and then shift this, just a little bit like that. Nothing too super complex, complicated happening here. And again, there are a variation of the hues right here, the variation. Let's just go ahead and set that back to grayscale. So they're just variations of the hues I used to create that. So I'll just go ahead and turn this on for the other 4 borders so we can just see how that's looking. Now we're left with these spaces in between. So again, I just had fun creating this. So now what I did was to use a slightly warmer hue. So everywhere here is cool, and then along these edges, I'm just going to apply a nice warm tone there. So if I turn this on, this one as well. So basically just a few of these hues, and you can always remember we can use recolor. In case we don't want that, I'll just double click on this and I'll just drag this slightly down in case I want it to be kind of like uniform and slightly consistent with the colors on the edge. And basically that's it. That's it. Nothing too fancy over here. This is a vector tool, so I can zoom in as much as I want and nothing is going to kind of like nothing is going to get lost in the way. I'm not going to be losing any details, and I can export this at a much more higher resolution. So I think basically that's it. Yeah, and then finally I added a adjustment layer on top. This is a gradient map just to change those tones, and then I use the blend mode of lighter color, and then here I have a levels adjustment, and what this does is just pump up the color just a little bit. And you can actually see these the gradient map and the levels are not at 100% because they'll be too strong. So if I turn this off, it's a bit kind of like desaturated. If I turn this off as well, so this is the kind of like tone I'm getting. This is quite colorful, right? So this is super nice. This is quite colorful, but if I bring this in, it's just killing some of that color. And if I want to bring that color back, all I need to do is to just drag this lower. And see, it's kind of like changing the color tones. And because this is a gradient map, we can easily shift and push the color to something else. So now this is actually a different color, right? So I can just save this and change this. And what you can also do is to, here on the blend mode, each time you change the blend mode, it can give you some more interesting colors, right? So for instance, if I look at lighter color, that's super nice. And then what I can do is to go over here on my levels, and if I want to bring this back, I can just increase the levels a little bit just to give it this nice interesting color. And then on the gradient map, we can still do things like, adjust the opacity so we can bring in our other colors back and mix them. So that's a lot of things you can do, a lot of ways you can play around and quickly create multiple color variations. So I kind of like hope this is helpful and you've learned one or two things about Affinity Designer. And this is the Affinity Designer 1, not 2. So with Affinity Designer 2, there's an awesome cutting tool, so you don't need to kind of like use nodes to cut. So, and basically that's it. And when we're done, we can even save everything by selecting all your groups. So if I click on the first group, shift, click on the next two groups, I'll do a Control G and I'll call that all. Well, I'll just call that Mosaic Art. Hit the return key, and now with just one button click, I can turn everything off. And again, I can add more things. Let's try doing one nice little effect, and let's just call it a day. So for instance, if you click on posterize, this is going to, kind of like affect everything, and we could just drag this and kind of like see how it's working using a posterize level. So you can see we can even have this kind of like nice posterize. And what we can do is to reduce that effect. So I'll just go ahead and just drag this a little bit, just to add some of these details. And again, you can see you could just keep going so crazy and doing a lot of things and adding a lot of effects. So here I could try shadows and highlights. And I believe this might not be the best effect to apply here, but you know what? You can just keep trying it. And for our highlights, we just bump this here, or we could just mute all that brightness. So that's what this is going to do. And again, no good soup is good with 100% salt. So I'll just make sure that the shadows and posterize, let's just drag the shadows down a bit. And this posterize, let's see, we could turn it down and turn it up a little bit. Just to see you can have very funny color combinations. So I'll just leave it like this. Thank you very much for watching. And I'm going to do a lot more of these because these are actually fun to create. Actually took me like 2 days because I've been going off work and just coming back my little free time and working on this. So yeah, give this a thumbs up, like, subscribe if you found this interesting. Thanks very much for watching.